Okay, if we could come to order, this is an agenda for the special meeting. It's Tuesday, February 18th, 2020. And the opening statement is as follows. Pursuant to Section 13 of the Open Public Meetings Act, adequate notice of the time and place of this meeting has been given by prominently posting the sunshine notice of the Princeton Planning Board. Such notice has been placed on the official bulletin board at the Princeton Municipal Complex and by transmitting a copy of the notice to the Princeton Packet, Town Topics, the Times, Comcast Systems, and by filing a copy with the Clerk of Princeton on the 11th day of February 2020. Would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Capizoli? Mr. Cohn?
Here.
Mr. Oakman? Mr. McGowan?
Here.
Mr. Quinn?
Here.
Ms. Sachs? Here. Mr. Texarney?
Here.
Ms. Wilson?
Here.
Mrs. Gunning?
Here.
Ms. Spalla? Mr. O'Donnell?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. It's just one announcement, and I'm going to ask Ms. Wilson to repeat this one again, please.
Thank you. The Master Plan Committee will meet Friday, the 21st, this coming Friday at 9:30 a.m. in Meeting Room A to discuss and hear any public comment people would like to make on the draft green building and environmental sustainability element of the master plan. This is a draft document that was forwarded to the Master Plan Committee last fall and has been through some iterations and was sent out to newspapers and others last Friday and is publicly available. I'm not sure exactly where on the town's website is the green building draft.
We haven't put it up yet. Do you want it up? Because it can go up.
Sure,
Okay.
yes, that would be great. And if all goes well, then the element would be recommended to the planning board for adoption in March. Thank you.
All right. Any other announcements, anyone? All right. Under the findings of fact, we have TA Restaurant LLC. This is from January 9th of this year. It was a minor site plan with variances. Did you want to report on that?
Yes, hi. The attorney for the applicant advises that on page 1, second paragraph, it's noting that the applicant received a minor site plan approval for the construction of the building. It actually wasn't the applicant, it was the property owner, and that's the only correction that's going to be made on this document.
Okay, thank you. Anybody have any comments? Somebody want to move that correction?
I'll move
Thank you, David.
the
Is there-
revised.
Right, thank you.
Second?
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And that brings us to this evening's discussion. I'm going to ask our attorney, Marta Beulah, to go over what we're going to do tonight.
Good evening, and thank you for coming. This is a continuation of the Planning Board's review of the Thanet redevelopment plan for consistency with the master plan. I thought it would be helpful just to go over the process a little bit, reiterating what Jerry Muller had said at the last meeting. This is a somewhat limited review by the Planning Board. The Planning Board is charged and statutorily is permitted and is authorized to review the redevelopment plan and recommend to the council, the governing body, which will adopt the redevelopment plan, whether the redevelopment plan is consistent with the master plan, or if it's inconsistent, to make recommendations. The council, which will meet tomorrow and is set to adopt the redevelopment plan tomorrow, can take into consideration the planning board's recommendation. It can adopt in part the recommendation, or it can disregard the recommendation of the planning board. So while we welcome your input, it's important just to make clear that this is not a forum for the public input to make changes to the redevelopment plan. That would be either the council meeting tomorrow, which you're encouraged to participate in if you would like to make comments, or the site plan stage of the process, which is where the applicant comes before the planning board with a concrete plan, and that's where the public is invited to comment on any aspect of the development application. So that's why the timelines in this have been established. The other thing to be aware of, and that I think is important, is that the context of litigation that we're in here. You may be aware that Princeton recently settled its fair share plan and came up with a plan with Fair Share Housing Centre to settle its affordable housing plan, and that's been approved now by the Superior Court. As part of that settlement, Avalon Bay, which is the applicant and the subject of tonight's redevelopment plan, because they are the chosen redeveloper, negotiated with Princeton an agreement in which it laid out the plan for the redevelopment area, the details of which are described in the redevelopment plan, and set forth the timeline. And so you may be wondering why things are happening so quickly. Ordinarily, a planning board has 45 days to review and to provide its comments to a council. This is happening on a shorter time frame, and the reason for that is because that's what's been negotiated with Princeton and Avalon Bay, and that's been done in the context of the settlement agreement for Princeton's obligations under its Mount Laurel obligations. So that takes us outside of the normal land use process, so to speak. And it's why I want to make clear that while we welcome your input this evening, and we're continuing the opportunity for the public to provide comments, and the planning board is free to communicate that to the council. The planning board is restrained and restricted in the ability to actually make changes to the redevelopment plan. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Wanda again. And
Thank you very much. Let me ask, first of all, can you hear me? Any better? Not much. Okay, well, wave your hands and speak up if you can't hear the board, because when there are less people in the room, it is even harder to hear everybody else. Last time we met, we were going over various comments from the public on the plan before you, and that's what we're going to do tonight. I'm going to say again that it's going to be about 3 minutes, that you'll have to come up to the microphone. You'll have to state your name and address and give us your thoughts on this whole process. So, who wants to start? Anyone? You couldn't have come out on such a nasty night just to sit there.
No one else wants to come up? Oh, Adam Bjurman.
Sorry, so I'm going to swear you in. Just give me a second. If you could please raise your right hand and say after me. I hereby swear that the testimony I'm about to give shall be the truth.
I hereby swear the testimony I'm about to say will be true. So help me God.
Thank you. Please just state your name.
Oh, Adam Bjurman, 193 Grover Avenue.
Your last name again, sorry?
Bierman.
Thank you.
And again, I apologize. I've looked over the plan and I've read synopsis, but I might not get all the details, so I just want some clarification. On Thanet Road, the old IDA building on the right-hand side, Institute for Defense Analysis, that building is not going to be torn down, or no development will be on that?
That is correct. The building you're referring to, I believe, is 29 Thanet Road.
Yeah.
And that is not a part of this redevelopment
It
plan.
won't be. In the near future, is there any plan for that site to be?
The municipality has not received any formal proposals for that site.
Numerous people have come up to me in the neighborhood and they've asked, when you do, let's say the development goes forward and you build the senior housing and the Avalon Bay project, will there be access roads to go in different directions so the traffic won't come out of one road? Again, what's the deal with that one?
You're looking at me. I'm going to let Michael
sorry.
handle all of these questions.
I love your accent, though. So you seem really bright when you talk. So
Oh, that it is a tough act to follow with my central New Jersey accent. The redevelopment plan calls for access to the site and to the proposed redevelopment using the existing Thanet Road cul-de-sac, so there aren't other vehicular connections. There has been discussion about pursuing possible pedestrian connections and trail connections, but as far as vehicular circulation, it would be via Thanet Road up to Terhune Road.
I have to disagree with you there, Michael, because the agreement that we just discussed talks about exploring between the municipality and the developer the other easements that you are referring to, Adam, and exploring the possible use of them as means of vehicular traffic so that the Thanet Road circle is not the only entrance and exit. So that will be in the agreement with the redevelopment agreement with Avalon Bay, as far as I understand, which is not yet signed, but that both the municipality and Avalon Bay will look into use. Obviously, that would be contingent upon the entities that own those easements, but that's something that they'll explore the possibilities together.
So it can evolve. This situation can evolve in terms of
Yeah, and
implementation.
thank you, Councilwoman, for clarifying that. I was merely stating, I was trying to just describe what the plan is that you're looking at, but the Councilwoman is correct that there's been discussions about possible other connections.
And should I keep? I don't want to hog the mic. Or should I keep talking? Or I have a few more questions.
Someone else, Adam.
Okay.
Sorry, can I just ask, are those easements shown on here? Can somebody point out where those are?
The halftone stripes that crisscross are apparently different kinds of easements.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Some of them are utility easements. Some of them may be access easements. We don't have a lot of detail, but that's what those gray straight
Gotcha.
lines show.
I believe that this illustration shows some of the easements. The majority of them are utility easements. In lavender color, purple color.
I'd recommend over there, Jeffrey, and see them. It's really hard to see on the map. It's best just to walk through the property.
Right. You can get the tax map of this particular property on the web, and it does show all these easements. So you just have to kind of fish around a little bit for it, but it is under area 52. So.
Hi. I'm not sure if this is the proper forum to talk about concerns about traffic and biking that has to do with this development plan or not. Is this, if we're concerned about, say, traffic going down Grover, cutting onto Franklin, going on Snowden, those kinds of things, is this a place to bring it up?
Well, as I said before, the site plan application stage of this may be a more meaningful stage at which to make sort of more detailed comments about a site plan application. You're welcome to make comments today. I don't know if you missed my comments earlier, but this is what we're doing is reviewing, the planning board is reviewing the redevelopment plan for consistency with the master plan, and we'll make its recommendation to the council. But you're welcome to make your comments if you'd like.
I'll just make them for the record, because then maybe they'll come up
Would you
again. I'll
please
just be
give us
very
your,
quick
excuse
about
me,
it.
would you
My
please
name
give
is
us your
Kina
name?
Lipsitz. Kina Lipsitz. Do I need to spell it? Keena. Last name is Lipsitz, 246 Shady Brook Lane. And my main concerns have to do with traffic. My family is a bicycling family, and lots of people bicycle down Snowden. And my concern is that if you're going north on 27, you're going to be possibly either going down Terhune and going up Snowden, but another way to do it is to go Grover Lane on Franklin. Franklin and Snowden is there's this intersection that's really bad, and if there's a lot more traffic there, I'm really worried about all the kids who are bicycling to school, because they come in and they bike down Franklin to JW and to the high school. And so something needs to be done to either put in stop signs or prevent people from going down Grover or whatever it is. But that's something that I'm very concerned about.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello, sir. Just raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth?
I so do.
Thank you. And please just
My
state your
name
name.
is Kevin Wilkes, Wilkes, and I live at 204 Reservoir Road in Hopewell, New Jersey, a victim of the unaffordability of Princeton housing. So it's interesting to consider this as an area in need of redevelopment. If you think back when these office research zones were created in suburban New Jersey in the 60s and 70s, it was an attempt by planners to create economic alternatives in communities, and it was felt that in a time of unfortunate frame of reference of thinking of single-use zoning, of quadrant segmented zoning, one use per one area, that communities needed office space and business space, an entirely reasonable consideration. And in the 50 years since this office research zone was created, in fact, this is a really interesting map and drawing and aerial view. If you see the large footprints of the office buildings that exist there, you see how this ORE zone was created as its own little quadrant with housing surrounding it all around. And you have to keep in mind that at that time, Route 1 was desolate with farmland along it. There were no office buildings on Route 1. And starting in the 80s with the beginning of Carnegie Center and the virtual explosion of Route 1 office space, office use really took over out there, and the center of gravity of our northern Mercer County for office locations, office sizes, office footprints, is really transferred there, and that's rendered this area, while not quite obsolete, fairly vacant. The two buildings at 101 and 100 are vacant, fairly close to it, obsolete. Church and Dwight has picked up, moved a lot of their facilities, including their lease space at 29 Thanet, which they still currently hold a lease, but have vacated the building. 457 Harrison in the lower right there has significant vacancy, or excuse me, it's second up from the medical building. So the question really becomes, what do you do now? And I want to suggest to you the plan for knitting, for creating residential use in this area is entirely appropriate. In fact, it's a really good way to slowly, piece by piece, disassemble these obsolete office buildings and allow the Princeton community to grow additional housing, to thrive for different people, and to do this in a way that helps us address our affordable housing need in our court case for the COA settlement. But there's also an ability here to create some dedicated housing for senior citizens in the community, in a community that has a long history of doing so, and doing so with success. Spruce Circle and Elm Court are projects that Princeton advanced well before other communities, and they're not filled with pathology. They're filled with happy, wonderful, healthy, aging Princetonians. And they're happy to be there. There's been some conversation that you shouldn't have segregated housing. Well, of course, you shouldn't have segregated racial housing. and you shouldn't have segregated economic housing. And part of what you should fight as a planning board is the dissection of society into slices that don't create cross-fertilization. But it is appropriate to create an option for senior citizens to live together and age together and be slightly removed from the hullabaloo of skateboards and young growing teenagers filled with hormones and new Mustangs. You're not forcing people into these 80 units of senior housing. You're providing it as an option. There will be options for seniors who have a lot of money to live in the market rate housing. Last thing I checked, there's no prohibition for seniors to live there. So I want you to consider that you are creating a vital option for affordable units for seniors to enjoy Princeton, to age in Princeton, to be close to the shopping center. And it's interesting that Adam mentioned 29 Thanet. 29 Thanet is not like 100 and 101. It's not an obsolete building. It's actually in great shape. Church and Dwight maintains a lease. The building had an addition put onto it about 15 years ago. It's 43,000 square feet of reasonable Class A office space. As some of you may know, a number of us in the community have been working on a project to turn that building into a nonprofit community center for the benefit of all of Princeton. This is a project that's taken a lot of effort. It's not quite at the finish line. But if you disassemble this plan and don't create a new residential community next door, there'll be no center of gravity to put a community center there to assist the nonprofits in our community who need affordable space for their offices. So I urge you to dream about not only what this presents tonight, but what it can be, and to work towards making it a great redevelopment for Princeton. And don't be hung up on the thought that, wow, if we knock this down, we'll come up with something better. Let's try to make this work and then continue to improve it down the road. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Just raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth?
I do.
Please state your name.
Joe Butler, 18 Hibben Road. I feel like this is the old days. Kevin and I sat on Borough Council together, and I often had to follow him, and I was never quite as eloquent. But the band is back. But there are... Barely. But there are two things that I'd like to address tonight. One is, because I was a former member of Borough Council and the Consolidated Council, I had the privilege, the benefit, the responsibility for negotiating the previous hospital deal with Avalon Bay and then the developers agreement with Ron Liddell and crew. And I think there is probably some misunderstanding in the community, or a reservoir, perhaps a bad feeling about the changing in zoning of the hospital. And so, unsolicited, I would like to correct the record a little bit on Avalon's behalf. They did everything that they promised to do. They had a contaminated site, and they delivered everything they said they would do, and they didn't have to deliver contaminated soil to our SOC to do it. They did a lot. They handled that property with great care, and I think everyone would agree all the fears about the traffic, about what it would do to the neighborhood, et cetera, have been ill-founded. They really, all the buildings have assimilated with ease into the neighborhood. And I want to commend them. You know, when that plan was originally drawn, the small tot park that's there was originally in a small courtyard, was drawn in a small courtyard that looked like it would be inaccessible to anyone, or to most, or to the neighborhood. But in fact, it is right out in the open and accessible to people, some in our community who have the least among us, and they are more than welcome on that tot lot. And in fact, I think that they plan to make additional improvements to that, which will be greatly appreciated, enhance the area. And I also want to say, through my liaison with the rec department, I've had the opportunity to be involved with the special needs sports. And I've come to know that there are people, we have some developmentally disabled people who are living currently in Avalon Bay, and they have been welcomed with open arms, and they've had accommodations made. And I forget whether it's adding carpeting or removing carpeting, but it was reported to me that Avalon was more than accommodating. So I think that's worth noting. We did have a little litigation over the length of the deed restrictions on the affordable housing, but it was decided in court, and that was that. And as far as the escrow account, frankly, I think the municipality bears some responsibility there. So all in all, I just want to say I think that they have been a good addition to the neighborhood, and that they did, as far as I'm concerned as a council member, they did everything they promised. The other point I want to make is that I live in a neighborhood that is currently an area in need of redevelopment all throughout my neighborhood. Thank you very much, Planning Board. And it is now, I think Mr. Cohen used the word lying fallow. So the threat of the builder's remedy weighs heavily, I think, on our neighborhood. And so I hope that when you consider all that, you'll know that we do have very vulnerable areas in our community that would be ripe for builder's remedy if it comes to that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening.
Hi.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth?
I do.
And please give us your name.
Sure, again. My name is Mike. Last name is Pissarro. It's P-I-S-A-U-R-O. I'm the policy director for the Stony Brook, can't even say that anymore, the Watershed Institute. Thank you. I know I was here last time, and I know it was very late when I think I testified, so I just wanted to touch on a couple things. And I had one quick question. The area that we're talking about, that's currently not zoned for residential, is that correct?
That's correct.
That is correct.
Okay, all right. So I would, it's not zoned for, the master plan doesn't provide for that to be residential. So therefore, this plan, I think, would be inconsistent with that master plan. Last time I was here, I talked about some recommendations because of my concern with stormwater management, as well as the impact of Concept 1 on that stream. But I just wanted to make sure, because I'm not sure that I really sort of melded the master plan into that discussion. So your master plan has, in multiple spots, talks about the conservation of the environment as being one of the important goals of this community. It also talks, for example, on page 16, of guiding growth away from environmentally sensitive areas, clustering buildings in suitable locations, and providing green stormwater infrastructure and protecting those natural resources. Those in multiple places of your reexamination plan, so that what's before the board, the recommendations that come from this board should be that it's not consistent, whether you want to approve it or not, but make those recommendations to have stormwater management be required, whether it meets the major development requirements of the New Jersey stormwater rules or not, because there is a question, since this is a redevelopment, that it provide green infrastructure, not just your standard stormwater management that we have seen time and time again. New Jersey has adopted green infrastructure rules. They're not yet in effect because they have not been published, but this board could recommend, and I will be here tomorrow night asking the council to actually require that green infrastructure according to the new rules be provided. And just lastly, that Concept 1 plan, which would put development along Terhune Road, just as I again said last time, the back of the GeoWeb mapping shows about 90 feet between the street and the riparian zone of that stream. That seems extremely tight. That seems to provide an opportunity to really overwhelm that stream. Downstream communities are already flooding. I I've talked to several neighbors in the Meadowbrook Drive area. They are already experiencing significant flooding, and not just from extreme events. Putting additional impervious cover without actually managing that stormwater better than what we're required to do is a recipe for disaster for those downstream neighbors, I think. So I would ask that your recommendations include, better stormwater management, green infrastructure, and a preference away from concept 1. Thank you very much.
Mike, did
Thank
you
you.
feel that concept 2 was less environmentally invasive, because there's also significant wetland buffers there?
So the map I'm seeing right now doesn't show wetlands. That doesn't mean they're not there. Just being what I've seen on the maps here, assuming there are no wetlands, but I mean, if there are wetlands, you have a whole host of regulatory issues trying to get approval to build in wetlands. Good development in a bad location is still bad development. So whether it is the stream corridor or wetlands, you're putting people in harm's way and you're causing downstream problems. Because wetlands are a filter for our stormwater. They are a sponge. They absorb and slow down the flow and reduce flooding. So if you're going to impact those wetlands, you also have a problem downstream. And you have a problem right there because people will be living in what used to be a wetland, and they will have yards that are unusable certain times of the year. I see that time and time and again. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hi, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth?
Yes.
Please state your name.
My name is Megan Mitchell. I live at 49 Clearview Avenue. And I want to echo some of the sentiments that have been stated. The main concern that I have is traffic, and much of what Keena Lipsitz was mentioning. The fact that the traffic will be preventing people or endangering people from biking and walking goes against the master plan and its encouragement of walkability. And I would encourage all of the people who haven't walked this actual site to go and walk the site. And I encourage those on City Council to walk the site too, because I think the idea of walking to the shopping center is a nice idea. It's a half of a mile. And at this point, Avalon Bay has not provided a shuttle service. So with a week's worth of groceries or whatever it is that you're buying at the shopping center, and you have a 55 and up community and families with little kids, it's idealistic to think that they are walking this half a mile back and forth. Most likely they'll be driving, they'll be going to Target, they'll be going to school, they'll be going to piano lessons. This avenue is going to be backed up all the time, and our neighborhood is going to get cut through consistently. I would encourage further investigation of the easements, allowing the traffic to flow. It sounds like there's going to just be a lot of flow out of this development between the water and the cars, and it doesn't fit in with the master plan. Princeton doesn't want that. We want responsible development that's not a scramble based on a court order. We need more time. I would request that more time be requested so we can do a responsible job of developing these units which are needed in a way that reflects who we want to be as a town, to the environment, to our neighbors, to our master plan, to our past and to our future. So I would request more time for traffic studies, more environmental studies, easement studies, and that is what I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Also, I'm an interior designer and I've worked at several architecture firms. I currently work in Pennington. And the plan itself is not one that we can really support because it's just a plan. There's no other information. So I would encourage, if it is at all possible, to strike the plan from this decision, because I'm afraid that if you vote that it complies with the master plan, or if you don't, or whatever, and it goes to city council and that plan is on the record, I'm afraid that we will have very little, it will inhibit our ability to encourage the development the way we want it built. So I would ask that the plan as it is be just taken out of
Megan, I just want to say, so in terms of I think there was a misunderstanding in the general public about, and I think we also weren't clear at the previous hearing, but the redevelopment process does not in any way preclude the full vetting process and all the processes that happen through normal site plan review. So some of the things that people are referring to now, like traffic study, environmental studies, all those things that happen in the course of site plan review will still be required. That's separate. Like what we vote on tonight does not in any way prevent or satisfy the need for those further investigations. In terms of time, Princeton did actually spend 4 years on its affordable housing process and was the last town in Mercer County to settle, and the judge gave repeated extensions for Princeton. I wasn't on council then, but I can just say that I'm not sure that that's something that could be asked, but I think that this is not the end of the road tonight. This is just the beginning of opening up this process. To your point about the concept plans, I'm going to ask Michael, but it was my understanding that in discussions with Avalon Bay, they represented that they were not wedded to the concept plans A and B that were included in the MOU. Michael, can you speak to that?
Yes, I think it's a good point. The reason why there are two versions of the concept plan shows you that there's an openness in terms of what the developer is willing to build and what the municipality would like to see developed on the site. And as the councilwoman said, you still have the entire site plan application and review process before this board in the future when the developer comes in with an actual development application. So it really is the beginning of the design process.
Is that the meeting where the initial and the final review are in the same meeting?
It's actually very common to do preliminary and final site plan review of applications. I would venture to say most of our applications before the planning board are preliminary and final. It doesn't mean there's any less vigorous review of the application plans or request for information to be presented to the board and to the public. It's just instead of two separate applications, there's one.
Well, as it stands now, I would encourage you to not vote that this complies with the Princeton master plan. If this process going forward is anything like the process so far, it will be rushed. It will not allow time, because we are in a scramble, it will not allow time for thoughtful reflection and planning. And instead of a builder's remedy where the state is controlling the zoning, we are now going to have a developer who is a profit only caring about entity controlling what is built in our town. I don't know which is better, honestly. So we are in a pickle, but it's like when I asked my son, it's like we were asked so many times to do this, and then asked so many times to clean his room, so many times, Rowan, clean your room. if you're not cleaning your room in 10 minutes, I'm going to come up and everything that's on the floor I'm going to throw away. I come back in 10 minutes and everything's shoved in the closet. And this whole project feels like it's just shoved in the closet. And I know it's a difficult situation, but it is not okay to be rushing through this. And it does not comply with our Princeton master plan. So any encouragement anything you can do to help the thoughtful development of this land, we sure could use it.
Hi, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth?
Yes, I do.
Please just give us your name.
My name is Marta. Last name is Beulah. I live on 46 Clearview Avenue. So I just would like a clarification because we're discussing what happens once this plan gets approved, and I'd like to know how much flexibility will the council have in modifying what is currently in those plans after this is approved? Because I know the memorandum of understanding, if I understand it correctly, establishes that Avalon Bay can build as per the schematic drawings that we're seeing here. So I just would like to know what happens once this is approved. Are we stuck? We having to pick either option 1 or option 2? Do we have any legal means of saying we want to change, we want the buildings to be more dispersed on the site, we would like to have more pedestrian circulation, we would like to have parking occur behind buildings and not have all the residences be surrounded by parking lots? How much flexibility do we have once this is approved tomorrow night? Because it looks like that's what's going to be happening.
I don't think that this hearing tonight actually bears on that one way or another. My understanding in our meeting prior to this with the attorney is that where that interplay of discussion will happen is in the context of the site plan review. And I agree with Megan. I think it should be preliminary and final, not one.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think tonight is I don't think tonight is locking that in. And my sense is that we will have a whole process of discussing that configuration. But it's, SPRAB will look at the site plan, the PEC,
There's environmental reviews that have to go
there's
through and
there's
all
a
of that.
long, yeah.
Of
I mean,
course.
it is compressed, and we simply cannot ask the court for more time. We don't have that option, but there's certainly room over the next 120 days during this compliance period for the public to be actively involved in shaping a plan that is better than what is in Concept A and Concept B.
I'm just very concerned that we're going to be locked into not being able to do anything with the site other than what is shown here.
Can I jump in? Yeah. The answer is there is some flexibility. Some things in the redevelopment plan are establishing new criteria for zoning standards. For example, intensity and bulk and other regulation things we refer to as things like the number of units you can have on the property. Those which are significant criteria, things like that are set forth in this redevelopment plans, those won't change once the redevelopment plan is adopted. If it's adopted in its current form, the council can make changes.
What about something like setbacks? Some of the setbacks are at 0.
Setbacks are also included in the redevelopment plan. The applicant can always request a variance. And by the way, I mean, you're always at liberty to challenge the redevelopment plan once it's been adopted. That's something that anyone can do, which puts you into a whole nother track of litigation. But if you go through the redevelopment plan, it will give you a better idea of the things that the plan establishes that will set the framework for the development. Now, within that framework, there is some flexibility, as Michael mentioned. These concept plans are just concept plans. That's not necessarily how things will turn out. And there'll be a whole site plan application review, which is open to the public. And that's where you can come and make comments, and where often many things get worked out that aren't in this plan, which is sort of a bigger picture sort of concept, so to speak.
I just wanted to express that concern.
I just want to clarify terminology a little bit, because we use the term redevelopment plan and site plan a little bit freely, I guess I would say. The redevelopment plan is really a document with rules in it. There are concept drawings that have been attached to it, which are examples of what could be built, but are not. Are
they really examples, or are we going to be bound to having to follow mostly what's in those plans? That
So
was my concern.
response to that is the developer has represented to us that the rules that have been put in place, actually with things like the 0-foot setback, have been put in place specifically to retain some flexibility. And they need flexibility both to be able to respond to public comment about the design and to be able to respond to engineering challenges that they may come across as they delve deeper into how to actually build this project. So the bulk standards are pretty lenient. They're pretty relaxed. Specifically,
I guess you couldn't get much more relaxed
I
than
mean,
you are.
so I'm going to give you a specific example. The townhomes along Terhune that are proposed in one of the two design options, those are the ones with the 0-foot setback. And that's a setback from the property line. There's a very wide right-of-way there. It's 90 feet, whereas the road's only like 30 feet wide. So there's a lot of land on either side before you get to the property line. So a 0-foot setback could have the building setback 30 feet from the curb.
But then,
So
then you get into other issues, which are the environmental issues of being close to the brook and so on. But that's-
Exactly.
yeah.
So this is the point I'm making, is the 0-foot setback is necessary to give the flexibility to stay away from the brook. So that's why it's in there. Now, that may not be the direction that things go, because they may find from wetlands environmental studies that even with a 0-foot setback, they can't put the building there. And so we go with a different variation on the plan. But I just don't want people to be confused when Martina says that the redevelopment plan will be set after council votes on it. It's not set tonight, but it'll be set after council votes on it. But the fact that the redevelopment plan is set does not mean that the site plan or the design, the drawing that you're looking at, is set.
But the ordinances that are going to be regulating that site will be set in place tomorrow night, correct?
Correct. I mean, if council passes the redevelopment plan or adopts the ordinance.
Yeah, and so that's exactly what I was going to bring up. I think that the issue here is really about leverage. And so by defaulting to approve this site plan or this redevelopment plan and signing the agreement with the developer, you are basically forfeiting your leverage, because you're basically allowing the zoning to do whatever they want to do for the site plan. And yes, you can work with the developer to tweak the design, but at the end of the day, there's no variances that are needed, so you have no leverage.
That's what I feel, because once that becomes the ordinance and they're complying with the ordinance to that, for that site, obviously there will be the site plan reviews and there will be other reviews, but if they're complying with the ordinance, we might have less flexibility than we establish. Like, the council has the power to establish what that ordinance is, and I feel like we're just basically giving them everything they want. There's
the redevelopment plan. They can decide what the redevelopment plan is now and design the project with the developer, with the community, and come up with a product that is done collaboratively as opposed to in response to whatever they propose. Now, I think that it seems like we're between a rock and a hard place. And I think that it would be good to have complete clarification in terms of what we can actually do. Because, if the courts basically say we have to approve this redevelopment plan and we can't extend it, I don't know what we can do.
Zenon, first of all, I really want to emphasize we're not approving anything. We're deeming the plan in compliance with the master plan or not.
Yeah.
And then we're making a recommendation to council, which will approve or not approve the plan. So everybody needs to stop misusing the word approve as what's happening tonight.
I get that. I realize that the point of the hearing is about the master plan, but I just feel like the master plan is so ambiguous that you can't really make that decision.
Well, I think you have to look at the language, and if you think it's not consistent with the master plan, you have to point out why it's not consistent. Personally, I feel like it's very consistent with the 2017 master plan re-examination report, which is the most recent version of the master plan that we have, which talks a lot about looking for opportunities to create new locations for affordable housing, amongst other things. And so, into encouraging walkability and a lot of the things that we talked about at the last meeting about this plan that it's trying to accomplish. So I think it's tough to deem this non-consistent with the master plan. If anybody up here disagrees with me, I want you to tell me why, not just because you want leverage over the developer, because that isn't a reason why a plan is or isn't consistent with the master plan. It's a tactic. It's not a reason. But all that being said, I think the best thing that we can do to try to improve the plan is to make specific suggestions of things that we think would improve the plan. The developer is in the audience tonight. He's hearing what we're saying. And if we make good suggestions that don't cost an arm and a leg, there's a decent chance that they'll work to incorporate them into the plan. I think that's, as our role as a planning board is best fulfilled by providing that kind of commentary on the plans that are in this packet.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is basically, we should figure out whether it's inconsistency with the master plan, and also we can make suggestions to the developer.
Exactly.
For how to make it better. And to council. Yeah, and to the council. Okay.
Kip Cherry, 24 Dempsey.
Sorry, one more time, please. Just give us your name one more time, please.
Kip, K-I-P, last name Cherry, C-H-E-R-R-Y.
Thank you. And just raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
First of all, I respectfully disagree with some of the conversation that has just been going on. I think that there are many inconsistencies with the master plan, and I think after tomorrow, we're going to be cooked into what the MOU says. The MOU says there cannot be any changes that create cost to the developer. So if we don't get the changes made now, I fear we're not going to get them. Also, the MOU says that they will not go beyond the state code. The state code is extremely loose. It's not up to date. And I'm going to point out some of those places where it's not up to date that we need to be concerned about right now. First of all, I have many concerns about the consistency of the redevelopment plan with the vision of the master plan, but I'm just going to focus on two areas. First is the impact of the project on public facilities, namely our schools. I've become very concerned that there is no Thanet pilot for the school district. We don't have a good projection yet, but Thanet will produce school-aged children. I've heard estimates from 5 to 10 to 80 school-aged children. We need hard numbers, but we don't have them, and tomorrow is going to be the vote by the council. As you know, the levy that supports the school operating budget can only increase 2% per year. If there are students coming from Thanet for which there is no tax revenue or pilot, that will make school finances very difficult. I understand that there is a willingness to potentially carve out a piece of the pilot for the school district to cover the number of kids expected, and I've been discussing that with David Cohen. This is critical, and I very much appreciate the willingness to work this out. But we cannot put our school finances into jeopardy with this Thanet agreement. And I think it's extremely important that a little piece of, or maybe a bigger piece of the pilot be carved out for the school districts, even if that means that the town has to make up the difference in some other way. Again, I don't see any wiggle room in the redevelopment plan on that. It's now or never, or the MOU.
Kip, I don't think that the developer has anything to do with the decision of whether to use the pilot for the schools versus for other purposes.
But that's in the agreement, so.
No, the agreement just tells how much they're contributing. It's up to the town and the school district to decide how to divvy up what they're contributing.
Okay, well, in any event, I think that divvying up should be settled on right now. The other area I want to talk about is fire safety. I'd like to focus on the two proposed concepts on pages 38 and 39 in terms of their compatibility with the master plan. First of all, I don't think that the master plan envisions mega blocks in terms of Princeton zoning or character. When I look at concepts 1 and 2, I see mega blocks. I don't see that much difference between the two. Both have 5-story mega blocks in the center of the site. And to me, these mega blocks show little imagination in how they respond to the environmental features of the site. And as lightweight wood construction, often referred to as stick construction, they present major fire safety challenges. What I would like to see is the mega block broken into smaller sections of not more than 7,000 square feet. You might ask, where did that number come from? It's actually right in the 2018 International Building Code. What's happening right now is that developers, and this is legal in the state of New Jersey, are linking together 7,000 square foot pieces and creating mega blocks. That's permitted under the state code right now, and unless we have language actually in the agreement with Avalon Bay, nothing changes that. And it says in the MOU that they're not willing to take any changes that create additional cost. And I think that this fire safety will create some additional cost. Everything does. I would also require 60 feet of open space between the buildings and NFPA 13 sprinklers. Not NFPA 13R, but just NFPA 13 sprinklers. Concerns about fire safety are real. What is happening, as I just said, is that developers are stringing together 7,000 square foot segments to make mega blocks with no space between the buildings. This creates a great fire hazard. In New Jersey, in 2015, a wood frame mega block in Edgewater caught fire and burned down. Everybody lost everything, including their animals. In 2017, a nearly finished mega block in Maplewood burned down. It was almost finished. And in 2017, our own Griggs Farm, a smaller wood frame structure, caught fire and burned, and a resident was killed. And finally, I would like to require a fire watch as required by S 1342, sponsored by Shirley Turner. There are additional definitions floating around, such as an update in the International Fire Code, which is being updated to 2021. Again, New Jersey has not adopted more recent code. This is not in New Jersey's code. They're way behind. The only way to require it is to put it in the agreement with Avalon Bay. And there is S 238, which just cleared the Senate, but doesn't seem to require fire watch. It just allows for junior firefighters to provide fire watch, but it doesn't require fire watch. as far as I read it. I would say that staffing a fire watch involves serious inspection work to do a good job. The Maplewood fire had a fire watch, and clearly it was not adequate. The whole thing burned down. I hope we're able to make the Thanet project safer by incorporating the requirements that I have listed, which will, by the way, enhance the site design of the project and improve how it fits into the character of the neighborhood, again, enhancing the consistency with the master plan. And finally, I'm concerned about project cost control. I have submitted some language on this, so I won't repeat it now. But again, it needs to be in the agreement, in writing with Avalon Bay. These people are very wily, if you want to use that word, and if it's not written down, it isn't going to happen. I would also like to see actual solar power installed, deleting the notion of solar ready, which I think is absurd. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just want to respond to Kip. I'm going to let David, I agree with you about the fire safety. I think we've been working on that, and my understanding is, well, I'm going to let David answer that. I'm just going to address your comments about the school children, and to say that this particular configuration was the first choice of the school board, that the 80 senior units, if it were built inclusionary, that would be 400 units of family units. That on the Avalon property altogether, there are a number of units with developmentally delayed adults that do not have children, and then the senior property, which does not have children. And in general, the ballpark statistics for affordable units is that they are 90% occupied by families with children, and in market rate units, it's only 3%. So basically, this site is, whether one agrees with it or not, it's designed to minimize the impact to the schools, and it was something that the schools, it was their first choice, actually. So.
I know all that, but the schools need financial help with each student.
I agree.
Hi. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Please just state your name.
Yeah, my name is Mark Frieda, 16 Fisher Avenue. So I'm not really commenting on either concept, but I have a couple more, I guess, process questions. And let me just tell you what the two questions are, and then whoever should answer them can answer
Hey,
them.
Mark, I think you need to raise the mic a little bit so that we catch on the recording.
How's that?
Much better, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. So my questions are, I'm trying to understand what qualifies this site as a site in need of redevelopment as opposed to just a site the owner was having trouble selling at a price they wanted. So my experience with sites in need of redevelopment go back to the 1980s, and I imagine the definition then was very different than the definition now, but I know as an elected official back then, we would have had a hard time calling that a site in need of redevelopment. So that was my first question. And then the second question would be, what is the difference to the developer being able to have this as a site in need of redevelopment versus going through the quote-unquote normal process? Is there some advantage, disadvantage? I'm just not clear on either one of those.
So to your first question, the answer is simply there's a list of criteria in the statute, in the housing and redevelopment law, giving the criteria that is required to find a designation of redevelopment, and it can be one or any one of that list of criteria, and I believe it's actually in the redevelopment plan. It may be in an appendix. So, and that could be, I'm just looking
We already
at,
voted on this almost a year ago, designated as a redevelopment site.
Yeah.
There was a long hearing, and
No, I know that, but I mean, I've been asked by a lot of people in the last several weeks this exact question. I'm not sure what the answer is, so.
The specific
I think it's
criteria
worth
that was
reading the
used
report.
was the obsolescence of the buildings in this instance. That's one of the 10 criteria that Martina was referring to. And the planner who prepared the report designating it an area or recommending designation as an area in need, for the most part, hung his hat on that particular hook, that the buildings are obsolescent. Low ceiling heights.
It was not something that it actually doesn't, it helps the municipality more than the developer. The municipality wanted it because it provides the opportunity for a pilot, which is what funds the senior.
Right, but that really has nothing to do with whether it meets the master plan, having the town have the ability to do a pilot, because we could then question
it's apart from
whether the
tonight's
pilot makes
discussion.
any sense or not, which is a whole separate discussion, which really is
Right.
tomorrow night, not tonight.
But you can't do the pilot without.
No, I understand that, but if the pilot isn't in the best interest of the community overall, then that kind of calls to question the whole thing, but.
Right.
Okay. On the second question?
Right. And by the way, if you turn to page 4, you'll see a little bit of the background on the criteria. As to your second question, it's a good question. The answer is that designating an area in need of redevelopment gives applicants and gives a municipality a little bit more flexibility in how to develop land that may have deteriorated to the point where getting a variance for a use, which is a difficult and costly process, is just inefficient. And so the idea is really to create a whole new zone, essentially, which is often done with a specific project in mind. That's a fairly typical way in which redevelopment gets done, is that there's a bidding process and a municipality has an idea or wants to solicit ideas for the use of an area that is deteriorated in some way or is obsolete. And so redevelopment is essentially a kind of a technique and a tool that can be used to create a new zone where you establish new criteria. It's a more comprehensive, less costly, in some ways, and a more straightforward process and more efficient way of redeveloping land, essentially.
But that would be, I just want to make sure I understand. It's more efficient and less costly for the developer of the land or for the community?
Well, for the developer, but I think the sort of the constitutional spirit behind it is that it's really in everybody's interest. It's a way to reconceptualize the use of a piece of property without piecemealing. If conditions on a property have deteriorated to the point where you would need to make substantial changes, or a developer would need to request relief from a planning board on many aspects of the land use, that's less efficient than being able to do that within a new redevelopment concept that essentially reconceptualizes and permits changes to the use. And so it's a legislative process. It's a participatory process in the sense that, these things are done to some extent with the involvement of developers. So it's rare that a municipality will just designate a redevelopment area without having some idea of how that property should be used.
Right. So if I'm hearing you correctly, it would be normal perhaps for a municipality to reach out to a number of developers and say, give us a concept or a plan for a property that we might think is in need of redevelopment, as opposed to working with one single developer. Would that be a somewhat accurate statement?
Well,
this was already owned by Avalon. We didn't reach out to them.
I
They already owned
understand it, but I'm just trying to, I'm trying to make a point, which is,
right.
I'm not convinced this meets the merits of the merits of this make this meet the intent of the master plan. We need affordable housing, I get it. Do we need to build 221 units of market housing in order to get 80 senior units? I don't know. That's what I'm just trying to understand, because it seems to me that in a prior life as an elected official, this is almost like spot zoning as opposed to redevelopment. So I'm just trying to understand the difference. Because anyway, go ahead.
Well, no, this is not spot zoning. And part of the purpose of this proceeding is for the planning board to decide whether this is consistent with the master plan, which wouldn't be possible if there was any spot zoning going on. the point is that in order to make use of any property, you need a developer to do that, right? And that can be done in a number of different ways, and it's a fairly transparent process. I mean, a municipality may put out bids and accept. I mean, Michael can maybe able to speak to this a little bit more. I mean, this is really something that happens prior to the designation of the redevelopment area to begin with. You know, all of which was done with public hearings in December of last year. At which point, you know, Avalon Bay was already involved. They own the property, of course.
Right, but I imagine Avalon Bay owns the property or has it on a contingency basis. Do they own it outright? I mean, if they don't get all their approvals, they're still going to own the land?
They have a contract to purchase.
And that contract states that even without approvals, they're still going to purchase it?
I haven't seen the contract. I don't think that it
Right, well,
obligates them to purchase unless they get the approvals.
Okay. I'm going to assume that it's under a contingency contract and not just that they're going to buy it no matter what. I can't imagine they're going to buy it if they can't use it. But regardless, my concern is, and I understand the town talked to Avalon because they own the property, but I still think it would be in the best interest of the community and would meet the intent of the master plan if the community, if the municipality had actually talked to more than one developer about what would you do with this property. Because in essence, we're telling the community, and if you say this meets the intent of the master plan, you're saying to the community there really was no need to talk to more than one developer, and it sounds that's not the normal process on a site in need of redevelopment. So I'm just concerned that
I think,
this
Mark,
wasn't...
that you're thinking about the Pearl developer, which is the developer of the senior.
I'm not thinking about Pearl at all. Yeah.
Okay.
Right now, everything I'm thinking about right now has to do with
Avalon
Avalon.
already owned the property.
Sorry?
Avalon already owned the property. We didn't have the option to look at.
Okay, I would debate that it still would have made sense to talk to more than one developer about what they would have done with this property to get a sense as to what could be done with the property and at what cost.
Yeah.
I mean, I think part of meeting the intent of the master plan isn't that we do affordable housing or any project at any cost. And then I have to wonder if this project's being done at any cost. I understand there's a court decision, and the court decision says you will build X number of affordable housing units. I don't think the court decision says, and I could be wrong, that we will specifically build something with Avalon Bay.
Well, you have two council members here, so maybe they did talk to other developers. I can't speak to
Right,
that.
I know you can't, and I don't mean to direct it at you, sorry. And I don't mean to put anybody on council on the spot.
Yeah.
Or prior
Actually,
council.
the settlement agreement, which was blessed by the court in the...
That this redevelopment plan is unusual. It exists under the umbrella of the settlement agreement, and the MOU between the town and the developer. So it's, I think, accurate to say, and between Michael and Martina, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's accurate to say that the town does have somewhat less flexibility than we would otherwise have. And that's just an eyes wide open
Right.
fact of life.
Yep.
And at some point after the public is finished, I think it would be good for Michael to summarize comments that he got from the planning board since our last questions or comments or whatever, since the first time we looked at this a couple of weeks ago. From my perspective, this plan is very much consistent with the master plan in some really important ways, and it, as I said at the last meeting, concerns me in other ways, and it's sort of yet to be seen whether things like human scale and, well, a variety of other things that are laid out in the master plan, not so much in the reexamination report from 2017, but in the sort of foundational strategic overview goals of the master plan. So anyway, might have gone into the realm of rambling. I want to hear what else you have to say, but just wanted to acknowledge that there is that, we are in a framework that you're not usually in with the redevelopment plan. And I really appreciate the variety of comments we've gotten today about specific concerns as well as more general ones related to planning and previous experience with Avalon.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's all I had. Appreciate it. Thank you.
So, I'm just curious, like, oh, sorry. Wait, am I not allowed to speak? Okay.
Could I just address Mark's concerns a little bit as a former member of council and someone who sat on the Economic Development Committee? We talked to a number of people about this. We did do some outreach on this property. We would have loved to have had ratables, you know, that property thriving economically more than it has been for quite some time. So, you know, we talked to the university, we talked to any number of people trying to get interest in that. So it is true that by the time some discussion happened, Avalon Bay was the contract purchaser of that. But Avalon Bay is a financially strong partner in this, and I don't think you can underestimate the value of that. We've all seen properties start to be developed and have them go bad. So I know it feels like a little bit backed into this, but the truth is we've been looking for someone to do something with this, and in this case I do think, you know, we couldn't find anybody. No one was interested in locating. I mean, Kevin gave a nice history of the way people used to think about where you would have business development, but nobody wants to be there now, apparently. So, and, you know, we fended off McMansion development there. So there's been a lot going on over a couple of years.
So I'm just curious, can we like postpone this like a few months to like figure out a better redevelopment plan, or
No.
No?
No.
No, it has to be done. You guys are voting on it tomorrow?
Again, yeah, the council's voting on it tomorrow. There's a schedule that's, again, been set up by the court. We have about a 90-day window to enact the entirety of our affordable housing plan, including rezoning all of the sites, updating the housing element of the master plan, rewriting our affordable housing ordinance, and a bunch of other stuff too. So we have a very limited window, and it's time to give council the board's decision. And
can council make conditions of approval tomorrow, like in terms of like essentially revising the redevelopment plan that night? Like similar to
non-substantial changes to the redevelopment plan would have to require reintroduction, which would be a problem because it's a 2-meeting process. Minor changes can be made at the meeting, I believe.
That's right. When you say conditions of approval, I don't know if you're, it sounds like a site plan
Well, that's what
concept.
I was using, that language,
Yeah.
but I mean, can something similar be made?
Right, as
Like
David
amendments?
said, sure. If it's substantial changes, they would have to have another reading of that, which, given the timeline, is not probably going to happen unless there's a reason why they need to make changes.
Okay. Sorry. Did somebody want to speak?
Can we make the recommendation, David? I mean, it seems that the one thing, that everybody agrees with, is the concern about the superblock and the interest in dividing it up so that it retains more of a neighborhood feel. Is that something that can be made as a recommendation? How would that be incorporated?
I would think so. I mean, anytime the board sees a conceptual plan or a concept plan, the response of the board is non-binding. Okay, this is not a formal application for a site plan. So anything that we say about the plan is the sense of the board. It's a recommendation. It is non-binding.
So you're saying that they don't have to do what we recommend.
That's
That's what non-binding
that's
means.
absolutely correct.
Yes, please.
Hello. Hi.
Yes.
Please just raise your right hand, please.
My name is Janet Heroux, and I live at 388 Terhune, which is right there on the intersection of Thanet and Terhune. I am assuming that this plan is a fait accompli. Hopefully you'll make it as nice and as human as you can. When can we, I'd like to know when we put in writing things like that they have to put soundproofing on all their HVAC stuff, and that lights don't shine into the back of our houses, that they try to minimize. So we have this huge development going up in our backyard. There's a lot you could do to make it less horrible for us. And when do we put that in writing? When do we make sure that they maximize the protection to the neighbors, sound, light, traffic, pollution, noise?
That all gets worked out at the site plan application stage of this, which is the point when the applicant will submit a plan, and there'll be a hearing on that, open to the public. There'll be an opportunity for comment, and the board will consider requests and potentially impose conditions as a requirement to approve.
Can they shoot all this stuff down because they will claim it costs money? I just heard something that there can't be changes because it might cost them money. It'll cost us money. That's our one asset, that house.
Yeah. The planning board has some constraints under municipal land use law in terms of what kinds of conditions can be imposed on a conforming site plan application. But I think the kinds of things that you're talking about are absolutely ordinary requirements in a site plan process, and I don't anticipate we would have any problem getting the applicant to agree to fulfill those conditions.
And I don't know what all my neighbors think, but I want to say that I actually endorse the plan where the housing is along Terhune, not in that chunk of woods, because again, there's many reasons for having building along Terhune. One would be to slow traffic, and two would be because right now that section of Terhune is hideous, and hopefully it could actually look nicer. Just saying.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Yeah.
I'll be brief.
Megan
Mitchell again, 49 Clearview Avenue. I wanted to mention that in the Princeton master plan, there are words about dead ends and cul-de-sacs and roads that don't go anywhere, and that is exactly what this is. And in that sense, it does not comply with the Princeton master plan or the idea of the Princeton master plan. The second, I have a question about timeline, and I would like to ask if someone could explain the part of the negotiation between the town and Avalon Bay whereby the town must pay Avalon Bay $500 a day for any undue delay, meaning, which I don't know what that means. It could be if we are requesting a traffic study or an acoustic study or a pollution study. I'm wondering if it speaks to the motivations of the council. If we are stuck with a $500 a day bill, how likely are we to push for the changes we want to see?
Well, I was not part of council when this was voted on. Again, there are two council members here who maybe want to speak to it.
So Certainly, we're not eager to spend $500 a day to prolong the process unless there's a good purpose for it. I think we have already delayed this this process by 2 weeks or a week and a half because we didn't want to rush things unduly. We had a hearing previously, and the applicant would have loved for us to have had just the one hearing, and we would actually have had to do that in the one hearing in order to comply with the court-ordered schedule. But instead, we said, no, we think this deserves more conversation and consideration by the planning board. So we decided to carry it over to this meeting. I think you will find as the process continues, especially the planning process, many of the things that you mentioned can happen without undue delay. Traffic studies actually are typically done by the applicant, and so it's on them to do it in a timely fashion rather than a requirement of this board to do it in a timely fashion. But the point I'm trying to make is that when there's a good reason for taking our time and something to be accomplished or something to be achieved by taking the delay, we'll pay the $500 a day.
Yes, Tim?
I have a question for the council president. Would it be appropriate, your understanding of the current relationship with Avalon Bay, would a suggestion that residents write directly to Avalon Bay with their suggestions and concerns, as opposed to coming to multiple meetings and, I mean, we're here to decide whether this is consistent with the master plan. In my opinion, it is. I hear a lot of concerns that are legitimate concerns by neighbors and by members of the community. And I wonder if it wouldn't be helpful for us to suggest that they write directly to Avalon with their concerns and suggestions.
With all due respect, as you like to say to me when you disagree with me.
And I mean that, it's just not a pro forma comment.
The reason I don't think that's appropriate is because Avalon Bay has no way to sift between the comments that they receive and prioritize which ones rise to the level of something that the planning board as a whole would really be concerned about versus something that just a single resident or a couple residents might be concerned about. So I don't think that that would be the right way to communicate to the developer the municipality's priorities. I think it's something that should come from the appointed or elected boards that are going to be interacting with them.
That acknowledged, there's nothing to prevent a member of the public from writing to the developer directly to share their concerns.
Certainly not.
Thank you.
So I have a little bit of a crazy idea. Hear me out. I don't know if this is the right place to talk about it, but I'm just curious if we could, change the requirements in the redevelopment plan to kind of trigger variances. I don't know if that's possible, but say if, for instance, if there was like a 1,000-foot front setback, perhaps, would that potentially require the applicant to seek a variance? I don't know. You don't have to respond to it. Maybe the planner. I mean, what I'm saying is there any way to, I guess, have potential variances in a redevelopment plan?
I mean, it's more of a question for the attorney, the idea of something that would almost automatically trigger variances, I've got to believe there's something in the law that would frown on that. There's certainly nothing to prevent the developer from coming with an application that does require variances, although I would be puzzled to think that they would do so because the ordinance has been drafted specifically to give them the flexibility to not need variances. So I know that's an unsatisfying answer to your question, but, and I think I understand, you know, where you're going with it. But
I'm not trying to make things harder for the applicant. I feel like, you know, it seems like we have no recourse, we have no real say, and, you know, if it comes in front of the planning board in terms of a site plan and we deny it because it's not a good application, then it's on us. It's not on the developer.
yeah, that's actually standard municipal land use law. I mean, any developer who comes with a conforming application has a presumption of approval. We can put conditions on the approval to improve the application. If there are no variances, often those conditions require the consent of the applicant. But if they're good suggestions or standard types of suggestions, you know, they usually, I mean, you've been on the board long enough to know how those conversations go. You know, we'll ask for 10 things and we'll get 8 of them, and, you know, life goes on.
If I could just jump in also, I mean, you know, the idea that the planning board is involved in this is, it reflects the importance of the planning board in any development of land. If you have a suggestion, and maybe what you're saying would be best done by just having a comment in your report to the council, and the council will consider the report, and it's, you know, the council has some discretion, but the planning board is closest to the development process and is the body that will be considering the site plan application in the end. And so it's in the interest of the council to take into consideration comments from the planning board in a process like this. So, you know, the idea that we keep talking about how this is a fait accompli, I don't think that's necessarily a fair characterization. I mean, the council, if it's doing its job, which I know it does, will take into consideration the comments of the planning board and make changes as appropriate to the redevelopment plan. It doesn't have to. Just to be clear, it doesn't have to. It can decide not to do that.
Or we'll rely on the planning board to impose them as conditions when the site plan application comes in. That's the other thing to remember. I think, you know, my goal with this meeting tonight is to give some direction to the developer to help them craft an application that will be more acceptable. You know, unfortunately, very few of the points of discussion so far have been specific enough to be actionable. I hope that with the remaining time we have left in the meeting that we'll have some really specific ideas. I saw Bill Wolf got up to speak before. He didn't get a chance to get to the microphone yet, but I'm hoping he'll have some ideas as chair of SPRAB, and I hope that members of the board will also have concrete ideas, suggestions to make.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think that might be better, more productive, realistic approach. Did you want to say something?
Michael, did you?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say something about process. In the year or so that I've been here, or back in Princeton, I've seen that Princeton has a very vigorous plan and design review process in place, something that this planning board and the public should be very proud of. I mean, the first step is informal meetings with the developer, with staff, and then we also, once an application is made, not only does that application, in this case, it would certainly go to the Site Plan Review Advisory Board, which is a terrific subcommittee of this board who really takes their task very seriously, and it's consists of a lot of design professionals. That's a very good design process that any application would go through. But also, we meet with the public on a regular basis. They can come into the planning office, go over the plans, ask questions. So that it's an ongoing and extensive design review process. To think that it just goes to the planning board for a thumbs up or thumbs down isn't really giving Princeton much credit because of the process that you've put in place over the years. SPRAB and the other committees that will be reviewing it, the Environmental Commission and others, will make comments and recommendations to the planning board. The planning board will consider those. There'll be public hearings. It's a wonderful open process. So I think that the public and the board should take some comfort in that we have a pretty extensive design review process in place.
Can I just suggest that as far as process, if there's anyone else from the public that would like to make comments, that they do so now, and then we can close the public comment period and the board can discuss among itself.
Maybe we could start with Mr. Wolf, who's been very patient.
Hi.
My name is William Wolf.
Please just raise your right hand and do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
I would continue the point that Michael was just making because my first concern after reading the document was that there was no mention of a site plan review process. And I would ask that the planning boards put it in writing that this should conform with the normal site plan review process, which presumably would start with a staff review and it would include SPRAB review and the planning board review itself. So far, none of that's been in writing.
Actually, I think it's in the memorandum of understanding between
I couldn't-
Avalon and Princeton.
I would check that. I didn't find it.
If you look at section 4, and I think this was made publicly available right on the website. There's all of this.
It's also, I think, in 5.2 of the redevelopment plan, site plan review, but I don't know what it really says in full. But
I would ask that it articulate what that involves.
I think that's a fine suggestion.
And I'd also like to remind you of Michael's first statement that the first thing is review of staff. I have a very specific concern about this site that I think has been somewhat misrepresented in the plans that are included in that report, in that they do not show the detention basins that exist on the site. They show some of the stream corridor and floodplains, but it's my belief that there are detention basins, in fact, in the area where the footprint for the RSA senior building is. And I would think that the first step before anybody comments on a scheme like this, which may not be feasible, would be to have our staff and or our consultants. Joe Scupian has been here long enough that he reviewed the detention facilities that are on the site now for Thanet and is familiar with the township basin, which exists in the area behind where those townhouses are shown along Terhune. I am concerned that primarily a green way of handling stormwater on the site is imperative, and I think that would be a very healthy place to start, because I think what is shown there as plans may not be feasible. And then I would ask the planning board to think about what happens if that's the case. And I guess what troubles me most is the memo of understanding sets a minimum number of units that are to be put on this property. And I would submit that that's inconsistent with the master plan. I don't think I've ever seen anything in any of our zoning or planning that sets a minimum development regardless of environmental constraints, which is essentially what you're having here. To me, that ties the hands of the planning board so that all that process of going through the planning board and having all the environmental review is moot. Because you're signing, the council seems to agree to, no matter what, the developer can, not only can, but must put that number of units on. And that, to me, is completely inconsistent with the master planning process.
So that was required by the court in order to get the settlement passed, the minimum number, but I don't know.
I don't think the court could have required a specific number for this specific site.
Well, so that's my question. I think maybe if it's environmentally precluded, then the council will have to come up with some other location. That's my best guess.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Okay. Anyone else? Are we? I think we're ready. We need
Janet Heroux again. Everyone keeps bringing up that cul-de-sac, and then the conversation goes nowhere. Can't you get in writing that they have to put a road in onto Bunn Drive?
Janet, we have language in the redevelopment agreement requiring the developer to work with us. The municipality will actually take the cost of obtaining any easements needed to get a second means of egress. However, we can't absolutely require it because it involves a third party, the owners of the other properties. So we're really committed to trying to create that second means of egress.
Okay, good.
Kip Cherry, 24 Dempsey. I just wanted to make an additional comment, and that is, my recollection is that the MOU specifically says that the project should comply with state law. State law requires the master plan consistency review, and I think you have leverage with that. It's up to you to say what you think the conditions are. So I would not be shy. I would say what I would want to say. Say what you want and see how that works, because they are obligated to meet the state law, and they've said so right in the MOU that they will meet the state land use law. So go for it. Don't be shy, please.
Thank you. I think we may have one more comment. Hi. Please just raise your right hand and say after me. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth?
Yes.
You do. Please give us your name.
My name is Haewon Park. I live on Snowden Lane. I do not know how much influence the planning board can have to the developers, but I just wonder whether the planning board can ask them to spare some space for public use for the community, and not only for their tenants, but also the township people can go and use, such as playground for children, or indoor recreational center, something like that. something they can also give back to the township, not just taking, the profit out of the development. That's what I like to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just respond that it is in our agreement with the developer currently that outdoor amenities, such as a playground, would be available to the public. Indoor amenities would not.
If there's no more comments from the public, we'll close the period for public comment, and the board will discuss the redevelopment plan now.
All right. You want to start, David?
Yeah, I want to start with a couple of ideas that either I've had or have been mentioned to me that I think could help move things in the direction of improving the site plan. One is an idea for helping to reduce the impervious coverage, which is that Thanet Road itself is currently, I think it's about 28 feet wide. It has enough room for 2 travel lanes and parking on one side. If it were widened a little bit, it could actually have room for parking on both sides. And I know this would only really work in conjunction with, I guess it's Plan B, where there are buildings along Thanet Road. But I think it's an interesting concept to explore, where you would use that existing impervious coverage of the roadway itself to help meet some of your parking need, and could reduce the need for impervious, for quite as much parking lot elsewhere on the site plan. So that's one specific idea. And the other idea was that, we've got these 2 options, one with townhomes on Terhune and one with, I guess, townhomes on Thanet, and we're sort of saying it's either or, and then we have a whole lot of density crammed into the land at the end of the cul-de-sac. And I think it would be interesting to explore if you did build in both locations, along Terhune and along Thanet Road, and maybe that's too many townhomes, so maybe it's just townhomes on Terhune and like the 3-story type building along Thanet, but that would then give a lot more flexibility for the design of the piece that's at the end of the cul-de-sac on the circle, in terms of more green space. I know Mike Pissarro probably hates that idea because it's new impervious coverage instead of just building where there's existing impervious coverage. But I think both of those ideas are concrete and specific, and I'd love to see your designers take a look at them and see if you think they have any value.
Yeah, I would second that, actually. I think that I like those ideas. I don't really think it should be an either or. I think that, frankly, we should be looking at pushing more housing closer to the shopping center, because that will be ultimately the hub of activity, and there will be higher density there with, commercial and other uses potentially. And so, yeah, I think that addresses the super block issue perhaps a little bit. If you could take away density from that super block. I think to add to that, I think I also like the idea of having parking on both sides of Thanet. I also think that you can essentially get rid of the bulb of the cul-de-sac and create a bit of a street network or a grid within the site. I think that you can then create more of a human scale in terms of streets that have trees along it and sidewalks and better walkability. I think that one of the biggest concerns I have, and I think that also to that idea of having parking on both sides, you can actually reduce the parking spaces on the main part of the site. And I think that, that's a big concern I have, is that abundance of parking. I think it's when you look at that site plan, it's really a sea of parking. And so I think that we should be reconsidering potentially the parking ratio, maybe lowering it a little bit. I understand that people need their cars, but I also think that, you know, we should be encouraging, you know, walking, public transit, biking. I think that Mia was mentioning the idea of a shuttle. I don't know if it needs to go just to the shopping center. Frankly, I think that what we should be looking at is a shuttle that would go to the junction from that area, because, you know, it makes a lot of sense, and you can have commuters going to the city, and you can have people.
You
going
trying to
the
kill the dinky?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I lived on the north side of town, and I would take the freebie to the Dinky, to the junction, to New York City, which took a long time. And so, frankly, you know, if we want to have people riding transit, we need to have better systems. And so, frankly, I think that the north side of town should have a shuttle to the junction, and I think that that site should be part of that. I don't mean to dominate the conversation.
No, I just want to say that the idea right now is Edens, the development on Edens will have a shuttle that goes back and forth from Nassau Street, and I think we're hoping that Edens and Avalon will collaborate so that the Avalon property can connect with the Eden, so they can both somehow, you know, this is going to be explored.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it would be great. I mean, I think that, you know, if we're going to have really a hub at the shopping center, I mean, frankly, it would be great if we could, you know, be thinking about all of these sites collectively, because doing it piecemeal is not a great way to do it. But, you know, if we're going to have a hub at the shopping center, we should have reliable transit to, you know, good destinations. And so that could be part of it.
I just want to, before I forget, tag on to one of your comments about having possibly reduced parking on this site. That is actually in the development agreement, where there's the option for the developer to, based on traffic studies, possibly reduce the parking requirement below what's the assumed parking level in the bulk standards. So it'd be great to get a sense from the board if that's something we want to encourage the developer to pursue, that we'd be receptive to it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that would be great. While we're on the topic of parking, I think that having podium parking, and this is where I feel like there is going to be like a bit of a push and pull with the developer, because it's more expensive to build podium parking. But I think that by doing so, I think that the prices warrant it. I think that the market can support it. But you can take away surface parking, and you turn that into green space, green infrastructure, stormwater management. So Mike can be happy. And I think that, you know, while we're on the topic of green infrastructure, I think that all that green infrastructure should be, you know, good, not, you know, these basins, but actually green infrastructure with natural species and habitat, well designed, these types of things. I could go on, but I don't want to dominate everything. So.
Right. I just wanted to point out that actually Thanet Road is 50 feet wide. Hold on a minute.
The right of way. The road is 26.
Yeah.
But
So
it could
you
be
could really
30.
So it could get a
that-
little wider. Yeah.
I've been fascinated by the fact that over the years, every time a development has been proposed, they've asked for a corner store, a milk, a bread place, and so on. And someone tonight said that they thought that a half mile was a lot to trudge back and forth to get groceries. I wonder if this couldn't be the final opportunity we're going to have to put such an amenity in. This is a lot of people who probably don't want to walk to the shopping center, and another group that will need milk at 6 o'clock in the morning. So could we add that?
Suggestion for a convenience store somewhere on the site? I think
Small,
that's, nice idea.
How about a coffee shop while we're at it?
That kind of amenity is for people who can walk a little further.
I think, you know, having some sort of like cafe type of thing, small cafe for the residential development common space could be a nice thing. I mean, I want to push back with all due respect. I mean, I think that, you know, it would be nice to have something like that. But I think that, you know, the site lends itself to, you know, having primarily residential. Like, I know that mixed use is a good idea, but I think that, you know, having, you know, the shopping center be a place of retail and certain areas be primarily residential, I know that goes against, you know, the mixed use, you know.
Dunkin' Donuts are
greatness.
often this close together, you know. We've got
What's
one
that?
of, Dunkin' Donuts are often this close together.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't think that it's terribly far to walk to the shopping center, but yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to an idea of having like a little cafe.
All right.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I would, you know, echo some of those comments. I think, you know, David, a couple of the ideas you suggested, you know, made sense. I also think, you know, we should be, it's not clear to me what we can specifically ask the developer, but I think if we can state a preference for, you know, looking at podium parking or some sort of structured parking, you know, even though that is a cost implication, I think that would have real benefits. But I think this conversation kind of goes to really what my global comment was going to be, which is, and I think people have talked around it here, we talked a lot about it last time, is that I think, and this is really my one concern specifically around the master plan, you know, this being consistent with it, is that I think from a macro perspective, this is smart growth. I mean, it's close to the shopping center. You can get back and forth. You know, you can have the density for shuttle. You know, all these things we've talked about. But at a micro scale, it's not at all smart growth because of the way it's been designed. And I think particularly, you know, this idea of you know, the cul-de-sac that doesn't have any buildings on it, that you kind of have to walk down to get to the development, and then there's you know, there's a lot of parking lots surrounding buildings. I mean, I've been involved in similar developments where you know, you had a higher density senior building, and you know, and surrounded by townhomes, market rate townhomes for families. And the reality is nobody walks in and out of that. I mean, it's effectively a gated community. And so I think to the extent that we have the opportunity to push this in the direction of being more human scale and being more, you know, walking friendly, there's also the component of, you know, to get to the shopping center from this property, you're going through some of the other projects that are also to be developed. So we have to think about how those are being designed as well. You know, is it easy to walk through those to the shopping center, et cetera? But I think, I just think we need to express a preference for a design here that I think is achievable. It would be greatly assisted by a second means of egress if we can get that to the site. But you know, expressing a preference for designing it in a way that doesn't make it a gated community on a cul-de-sac, basically.
I strongly agree with those comments, and if we're at the point where we're saying specific things, that's what we're doing now.
That is, yes. It really is.
I would
At long last.
reiterate or affirm my very strong support for pedestrian and bike focus and pedestrian and bike scale, which is consistent with what Jeffrey just said. So it's not just talking about sidewalks and bike racks, but real attention to scale and a neighborhood feel and mobility between and among buildings for people who not only don't drive, but don't want to drive. And the connections between where they live and where they may want to shop or eat or work or recreate, those details are just tremendously important. I also support relaxing the parking requirement, pulling up parking places. I would like to see public space in this plan that's not just playground type public space, but things to look, places for trees and maybe community garden, the kinds of places that get people outdoors to do something more than watch their kids on the swings. I strongly agree with the call for high standard fire safety features and would ask Avalon to go above and beyond what is required by code at this point in time and look toward what should be required and what many people are pushing to be required. I would ask that there be electric vehicle chargers on site. And, I don't know how many, 6, 10, 12, I don't know, but the cost of those
There's
vehicles.
a ratio. There's a ratio for the amount of.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think
Whatever best practice dictates, but the cost of those vehicles is coming down. It's really important that we give people options in that regard. And, if they don't have a place to charge, then they're not going to be able to buy a vehicle realistically.
And
So-
actually, just to tag on that, electric vehicle car share is available, and car share on this site could be a really important part of reducing the parking requirement.
Great.
Because if you've got 3 or 4 car zip car like, or I think Green Spot is the name of the one that's the electric car share, you could eliminate a bunch of parking spaces possibly by attracting tenants who don't want to own a car.
That sounds great. I support that. I also strongly support the folks who have talked about green infrastructure on the site and retaining stormwater on site, turning even parts of the site that currently are impervious into something more like a sponge, and actually reducing the runoff that the site is generating now rather than just keeping it as much as it is, because if you don't improve, then the problem never goes away. It only gets worse more slowly. I would ask that the developer think about orienting buildings for passive solar and to optimize solar panel use in the future, and that in general you think about resiliency, for example, having generators on the site such that people have at least in the common room areas, so that there's access to places, access to electricity when the what hits the fan and the electricity is out all over town. Yeah, that's all I have right now.
So, if you don't mind, I'll add to that in the spirit of making recommendations. I think that one of the benefits of redevelopment plans is that you can actually prescribe green building practices where in traditional zoning you can't. And so I don't know if we can squeeze that into it, but using LEED buildings or constructing LEED buildings to the highest standard possible. I know that we're not supposed to make things more expensive, but in the long run, green buildings pay for themselves and they actually save money. But yeah, utilizing green building practices, making sure that the buildings are also not only green, but net zero energy. So that means that they're not pulling any more energy from the grid than they're using. And so you can do that by a combination of efficiency, geothermal systems, and solar panels. We need to be getting off of natural gas and fossil fuels because of the climate crisis. So I think that as much as the developer can, create those practices on site, the better. Yeah.
All right.
I would like to just pick up on something that Louise mentioned about human scale. 5-story townhouses to me are not necessarily human scale, especially if they're all going to be bunched together. I would definitely like to see something a little bit smaller. I know that there's a minimum of 221 units in there, but it's a big area. I'd like to see possibly some other design than this large block of buildings being put up, and again with more walking spaces, sidewalks, parking, on-street parking possibly rather than driveway parking. Just some additional thoughts there.
I think that is actually the plan. There's just one building which is a bit taller and then a bunch of other smaller units throughout the site.
Okay.
But I think it may be even that the bulk of the units are the smaller townhomes, and there's just one, the central one.
Can I ask a question? Partly because my computer died, and so I don't have it in front of me. But I think one thing that would go to some of the things that people are talking about really is the impervious coverage ratio. What is the agreement requiring for the site? And is that something that we could make a recommendation to change, or is that something that's locked in at this point?
It would be part of the redevelopment plan, which is what we're weighing in on right now. So I would say we could suggest something if we're not happy with what is in the plan, but I don't remember what the...
within the plan, it's 75%, it says. I'm sorry, impervious coverage shall not exceed 75%.
So I think we could say we think that's too high.
I was just thinking that, I know that we have the opportunity here to suggest to the developer, different types of design approaches, but that might be a more substantive recommendation that would push them in the direction of some of the things we're asking for, more specifically. I don't know exactly what the appropriate number is. 75% coverage sounds kind of high to me, but you'd have to see build out recommendations to see what it really means.
I don't know if
I'm confused. Isn't that for the senior? They're talking about 75% for the senior project, not for the entire.
You are correct.
Avalon.
You are correct. Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, for the senior part, it's right. It's almost entirely covered.
Well, if we daylighted all these streams that go across it, we certainly get rid of a lot of impervious coverage. The one thing that I wanted to mention is that nobody's going to find it attractive to walk up the driveway to the bulb, and then where do you go? You walk down again. And this would be a perfect place for a trail to go through, but nobody seems to have looked at this because of the difficulties with the neighbors. But I believe that if it was a walking trail like the other ones we've got, we might have a much better chance of people accepting this.
I do think that, again, the redevelopment agreement is asking for the developer to work with the town to explore all kinds of pedestrian and bicycle connections in addition to that one vehicular exit to Bund Drive. But yeah.
Well, it's not attractive, and my other suggestion was that if you had townhouses along it, at least there would be something that you look up the road and see lights on at night and so on, rather than this dark blank space that might come in.
Why are you nodding, Janet?
Who is not?
That was what Janet was asking to avoid, the nice lights along Thanet Circle. But
No, she wants them on, she prefers them on Terhune.
Yes.
As does Wanda, as do I.
Yeah, the plan should also avoid light pollution. That's another thing.
I think that-
We have that, yeah.
I don't like these dark spaces.
I just want to make sure that Kip's concerns, I feel like we keep talking round and round about the fire stuff, the fire safety, and I just, can we, David, can we, what exactly are we ending up with in terms of the fire language specifically? And
So my understanding of what's in the agreement right now is that the developer has agreed to the upgraded sprinkler standard, has agreed to masonry fire separation walls between fire blocks, but not to separate into 7,000 square foot pieces, and that they've agreed to fire watch during construction. I think those are the main upgrades beyond what is required by code. I know it's not everything that Kip wants, but that's my understanding of what's in the
and
current.
Kip, what was it in
language.
addition that is not covered in there?
Well, it's mainly the 7,000 square feet, because when there's a fire, it just stays at that one building. I've seen that happen over and over. It does work. The other thing is that the firewalls in that long-range current project do not go up through the roof. So if you have to put in a firewall, you want to make sure it goes from the foundation all the way through the roof.
I think that was agreed to, right? Like that was,
I don't think that's in there, but I'm happy to recommend that. And I'm sort of hoping that these will be a little more contemporary style buildings with a flat roof, which should make it a non-issue to take the firewalls through the roof. So we haven't really seen any design yet, but I've sort of encouraged them to at least explore that aesthetic direction, which would help with.
so Kip, if the master block was divided up and there was more division there, which people prefer for the site plan anyway, that would actually take care of the fire concerns, right? Just,
All right, I think we've gathered a fair number of ideas. If you're going to pass them along.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion.
Can I? I waited with patience to say just a few words. I think that this has been a good evening to capture public comment, and certainly the concerns are real. The developer's in the room and has heard the community's concerns. I would like to reinforce that there's nothing preventing members of the public from either contacting the planning office with their concerns, and the planning office could then forward those to the developer if that's comfortable for members of the public who don't want to sit through another meeting tomorrow until 10, 10:30 or 11. And I think that we have to come back to why we're here. And I think it was good to capture these comments. However, we're here to vote on whether this is consistent with the master plan. And I see that it is consistent with the master plan. This board has no say in the pilot that was negotiated by the municipality. I'm not sure what the current status is, but the pilot is allowing us to build 80 units of sorely needed senior housing on that site, which will minimize the impact to the schools. The first thing you learn on the first day of planning board training is that impact on school enrollment cannot be considered in a planning board decision. I thought Mr. Wilkes spoke eloquently about how this plan is in the best interest of the community. I had some other notes here. Let's see. I would also point out that as the contract purchaser of the Thanet, of the 2 lots of Thanet, Avalon Bay could have sought alternate paths to getting approval for that site that would have given the town much less control, that would not have included a senior element. And so I think that this is a pretty good deal, and I think that Mrs. Gunning and I are the only 2 who were on the board when we heard the second Avalon application. Correct me, I think maybe Julie, who's not here, correct me if I'm wrong. And I think this board was effective in pushing Avalon toward more sustainable practices that it now touts with its Avalon Princeton development. So I think we've sort of pushed them gently in the right direction, and I would hope that that would continue through cooperative discussions and not through litigation. So if I'm open to hearing Council President Cohen's motion, but as far as what we're here tonight for, which is to council ask us whether this is whether this complies with the master plan, I think it absolutely does. Thank you.
Okay. Any further comments? Anybody?
I'm just going to get on my soapbox for just a second. So, I mean, I think we have our planning conclusions here, and you can see all our points about how this redevelopment plan is conforming with the master plan. And I think that, like I was said before, the master plan is kind of ambiguous. You have certain principles that it conforms with and certain principles which we've heard that it doesn't. And I think that, it's kind of just up to us to decide really ultimately whether it is. But I mean, I think that some of the points raised at the previous hearing about the existing land use and some of the fundamental aspects of the master plan, it really doesn't say, it doesn't really conform to that. And I think that that's, I don't know if that's an issue that we can resolve today, but I think that it's an issue that we're working towards. I think that really ultimately master plan should be saying where we want to develop in the future. And we should have made this decision collectively as a community many years ago, as opposed to tonight. And so I just want to say that as kind of a, not necessarily a warning, but, I guess something to keep in mind, a nudge for the future, so we can be a little bit more proactive in the future, so that it doesn't really come down to, making decisions at the last minute.
Thank you, Zen. That's a great segue into thinking once more, we really need a new master plan, and we need it now. And I would hope that all of you will support us when we ask council for the funding to go over this. It's disgraceful that it should be 20-plus years with only very few changes. I hope that Ms. Wilson's group will come up with the green building element of the master plan to at least show that we're working into the new century. So with that, let me ask to call the roll.
I didn't make my motion yet.
I thought you made it.
I was trying, but Tim wouldn't let me.
Going to start over.
speech.
Did you make it?
I did not make it, but I will make it now.
Quickly, because someone else wants to.
I move that we find the redevelopment plan consistent with the master plan, and that we convey to council all of the comments from the members of the board, post-public comment, as items that the board supports becoming part of Avalon Bay's design considerations.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Would you call the roll now?
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Mr. Oakman?
Yes.
Mr. Quinn?
Yes.
Ms. Sachs?
Yes.
Mr. Czarny?
Yes, it is conforming to the principles here.
Ms. Wilson?
Yes.
Mrs. Gunning?
Yes.
Mr. O'Donnell?
Yes.
Motion carried.
All right, and thank you very much for your time and patience.
Move to adjourn.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.